Today is April 12th, 2023. I want to talk about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. But before I get into that, I just kind of want to talk about this Twitter post. This is by the Ukrainian government Center for Countering Disinformation. And it is a Twitter post about me. And when the Ukrainian government talks about you because they have a habit of killing journalists and politicians and pretty much anyone they don't like or disagree with, you should take it a little bit seriously. So I'm going to just go over this real quick. It's their Center for Countering Disinformation. It says, manipulation. Brian Berletic is yet again promoting narratives that are consistent with Russian propaganda about alleged Nazism and persecution in Ukraine. Now get this, they lowercase the R in Russian and they capitalize the N in Nazism. So they're making my case for me, that they respect and love Nazism and they despise and hate Russia, even though Ukraine has undeniable historical, linguistic ties with Russia for centuries. The goal is to demonize Ukraine and discourage its partners from providing further support, stop Russia. And again, when you do things like lowercase a country's name, you're demonizing yourself. You're being ugly. You're being nasty, and people can see that. It's not me doing it. And all I said was that Ukraine has a Nazi problem. They're persecuting religions, and they're suppressing languages, the Russian language, namely, in Ukraine. That is an obvious fact that the Western media has talked about for years, since 2014. As a matter of fact, that's how I responded to this tweet, which has 3,000 views, but only 1 retweet and 2 likes. I posted BBC video reports from 2014 and 2015. And as you can see, a lot of people came out and offered support to me, which I greatly appreciate. Very few people were coming out and backing this Ukrainian government account, accusing people for what? For pointing out what even the Western media reported on for the last 8 or 9 years. Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about the situation on the ground first, and let's do that by looking at liveuamap.com. It's a pro-Ukrainian live map, so keep that in mind when we look at it. And let's look along the line of contact. It includes the Dnieper River here in Kherson. That is a natural defense barrier, and it's very unlikely that Ukraine's offensive is going to cross over the Dnieper River. It's most likely going to come in the Zaporozhye area or somewhere along the line of contact in the Donbas region, or it could even go across the border between Ukraine and the rest of Russia over here. We don't know, and we shouldn't assume. There is a lot of talk that it'll be somewhere along Zaporozhye. The idea is to cut off the land bridge between Crimea and the rest of Russia. However, there's an actual bridge here, and there's also a massive port here. And that's actually what Russia used to supply Crimea before the bridge was finished being built, because there hadn't been a land bridge. And I think if they got by using ports, seaports and airports, I think they'll be able to do it again if Ukraine's offensive is able to cut this land bridge. And as other people have pointed out, and as I've said many times, if they cut this land bridge, it's most likely going to be at a huge cost. They're most likely going to lose multiple brigades worth of men and equipment. And these will be men and equipment they cannot replace. The West does not have any more to give Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have any time or resources to go through this cycle again. This will be their third army that NATO has built up for Ukraine. And if they reach the coast and they cut the land bridge in half, that's likely going to come at a huge, irreplaceable cost. Looking at the line of contact, there's a lot of fighting in the Donbas region outside of Donetsk. Again, Avdeevka, heavily fortified, probably one of the most, if not the most fortified cities along Ukraine's defensive line in the east and the Donbas region. It still faces encirclement, and you see these red rifle icons. That indicates fighting taking place closer to the city, along the edge of the urban sprawl, and that is outside of territory agreed upon even by this pro-Ukrainian map, to be held by Russian forces. So that means Russian forces are pushing in that area. And if we go to Bakhmut, not much has actually changed since my last update. I pointed out how Russian forces were now holding a significant portion of the west bank of the Bakhmutka River, and that remains the case today. And you see, again, red rifle icons fighting in the middle of the city, the rail station, and you can see how very little of the city is left held by Ukrainian forces. And you can see how next is Chasiv Yar. This is the next area that looks like it faces bombardment and perhaps possible encirclement. So that is the situation on the ground. Again, we're waiting for this Ukrainian offensive. The Duran, Alexander Mikuris and Alex Christoforou have both been doing an excellent job keeping up with all of the leaks, these NATO documents and other documents that have been leaked on the internet. They've done an excellent job going over that. If you're not following the Duran and the individual channels of Alex and Alexander, I think that you should. They do daily videos. Each one of them do their own daily videos. They also do videos together. I'll put the links to their accounts in the video description below. I kind of want to elaborate on some of the stories that have taken place over the last week that they have mentioned. I want to kind of dig in a little deeper to some of these. So the first one was from April 8th, so a few days ago. Al Arabia News: missile fired from Ukraine shot down over Russian-controlled Crimea. And this was a missile that was fired deep into Crimea and shot down very deep inside on the peninsula. And I saw many Western commentators very excited. Are these ATACMS missiles? They could be. The article says a missile fired from Ukrainian-held territory was shot down over the Black Sea town of Feodosia in Russian-controlled Crimea, the Moscow-installed head of Crimea's administration said on Saturday. The ATACMS has a range of about 300 kilometers, and if you look at where this missile was shot down and you look at some of the possible launch sites, I mean, they would have been launching this very close to the line of contact if that were the case. But Alexander Mikuris had a different possibility that he presented. He was talking about the Grom-2 missile. The Grom-2 missile is essentially Ukraine's version of the Russian Iskander missile. I mean, it's almost exactly like the Iskander missile. It even has the same 500-kilometer range as the Iskander missile has. This would have been the replacement for the Tochka-U ballistic missile that Ukraine had, which is not nearly as accurate as the Iskander. Unfortunately, this was being developed on and off over the years. Ukraine was suffering huge economic problems, and after 2014, political and economic problems. There's an article here that talks a little bit about it. This is Army Recognition. Ukraine unveils new Grom-2 short-range ballistic missile. This was January 2018. There's a picture of the launcher there. And the article says, in the summer of 2016, Ukrainian media reported that military engineers had begun development work on the Grom-2 system using money from a mysterious foreign client. That secret client was soon revealed to be Saudi Arabia, whose investors provided around $40 million for the design and development of this surface-to-surface tactical short-range missile system. Work on the Grom complex was first announced at the Arms and Security Defense exhibition in Kiev in 2014. A year later, it was announced that mass production of the weapon could begin as soon as 2018. The Grom-2 is a mobile short-range ballistic missile system fully designed and developed in Ukraine. According to some military websites, Ukraine has already performed first test launch of its new tactical ballistic missile in the second half of 2017. So what I'm doing here is bringing up some additional information that suggests that it could be possible that Ukraine has a small number of these Grom-2 missiles and that they use them to attack Crimea. They could also be ATACMS. Either way, the main point to keep in mind is that the missile was shot down. It did not reach its target. It was intercepted by Russian air defense systems. And that is a fundamental problem that Ukraine is going to have, whether they get ATACMS from the United States. They will never get them in the numbers necessary to saturate and overwhelm Russian air defense systems. And if they're using their own Grom-2, that will be very difficult to produce those as well. And some people may be asking, how could Ukraine even be still working on this? Didn't Russia blow up all of their military industrial facilities? And more or less, yes, they did. So let's try to figure out how this would still be possible. And this may also help explain how these Soviet-era Tupolev drones have been modified and used, again, in very small numbers and ineffectively, but used nonetheless. This is a foreign policy article from January 2023. Ukraine needs long-range firepower for victory. Kiev's allies should give it the ability to shift strategic gears. It says Kiev is already laying the tech. Well, first of all, it's talking about the need for Ukraine to launch long-range attacks far behind Russian lines, inside Russia itself, striking weapons manufacturing facilities, airfields, everything. And it just is not going to happen because they don't have the quantity of weapons to do it. And they also don't have an ability to get past Russian air defenses. So it's talking about that. And then it talks about Kiev and the technological groundwork needed for this shift, to shift toward these long-range attacks. And it says, it likely will not be able to scale it up to a strategically impactful level without NATO support. A Ukrainian deep drone strike campaign should be a Ukrainian enterprise from build to bang, but this would not preclude NATO countries from providing component parts, especially since they have already collectively provided Ukraine with systems responsible for killing thousands of Russian soldiers to date. Key inputs would include guidance systems, motors, and multi-effect warheads, loitering munitions capable of accurately delivering 40 kilograms or more of explosives to a target 1,000 kilometers away at a unit cost of $100,000 or less would not be out of the question. That would mean delivering a warhead akin to a ground-launched small-diameter bomb over a cruise missile range at a cost roughly equivalent to a Javelin missile round. But the problem with the Javelin, the problem with all of these missiles and guided rockets is that even the West, their military industrial output is strained and incapable of producing munitions, especially brand new munitions, at any sort of large quantity. So this is mostly wishful thinking by foreign policy, but what it demonstrates is within US and European foreign policy circles, the idea of providing Ukraine the ability to manufacture these weapons themselves, to absolve themselves from handing over these long-range weapons to Ukraine. So helping them build Grom-2 missiles rather than transferring over ATACMS. In either way, they're only going to have a small number of missiles to use anyway. And to add a little more information to this theory about how Ukraine may be producing Grom-2 missiles and also these long-range drones, the production was most likely moved to Poland along with everything else, maintenance facilities and everything like that. Here is a Reuters article. This is actually from April 6th. Ukraine, Poland to produce Soviet-era tank shells together. The article says, Ukraine's state arms producer said on Thursday it would launch joint production of 125mm rounds for Soviet-era tanks with Polish arms producer PGZ. It also says Ukraine will provide the technology and send its specialists to Polish cities where production facilities will be located, given high security risks. Russia using cruise missiles to destroy the facilities if they were located in Ukraine. Russia has conducted long-range airstrikes on targets in Ukraine throughout the war. So there you go. So that is, if Ukraine is firing Grom-2 missiles with a range of around 500 kilometers, that's probably how they're doing it. They had this ongoing project. It was very near completion. They may even have had test articles in existence. This conflict broke out. The facilities would have been destroyed, but perhaps some of the equipment was salvaged, the teams working on it survived, and they moved to Poland, and they continued developing it. And they may continue developing it further, but again, just like with everything else, the US, for example, or Europe, they have existing factories already producing weapons, and they're unable to expand the production of these basic things like artillery shells and missiles that they have been building for years and years. It will be very difficult to ramp up production of something like the Grom-2. And then that means what's left is this wonder weapon phenomenon that Ukraine has been attracted to all of this time. And that refers to Nazi Germany developing these spectacular wonder weapons with these immense capabilities, but they were never produced in the numbers necessary to change anything strategically. Fast forward to today, Ukraine with their Grom-2, they will never be able to make these in numbers large enough to overwhelm Russian air defense systems. Now, speaking of air defense systems, why don't we take a look at this recent New York Times article? Leaked documents suggest Ukrainian air defense is in peril if not reinforced. A huge influx of munitions is needed to keep Russia's air force from changing the course of the war, according to US officials and newly leaked Pentagon documents. So they're talking about these documents again. This is from April 9, 2023. It says, for more than a year, Ukrainian air defenses reinforced by Western weaponry have kept Russian planes at bay. But without a huge influx of munitions, Ukraine's entire air defense network, weakened by repeated barrages from Russian drones and missiles, could fracture, according to US officials and newly leaked Pentagon documents, potentially allowing President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia to unleash his lethal fighter jets in ways that could change the course of the war. And I've talked about this many times. Ukraine's large number of Soviet-era air defense systems prevented Russia from operating with total impunity over Ukrainian airspace. They're still able to carry out long-range strikes using cruise missiles and drones. They're still using military aviation for close air support along the line of contact. And more recently, and because Ukraine's air defense systems are being depleted, Russia has been using these 40 to 50 kilometer range glide bombs along the line of contact. And as Ukraine's air defense system depletes even further, Russian air power will be able to operate more freely. And it is most certainly going to have a huge impact. This is essentially how Russia changed the course of the conflict in Syria. The terrorists that the United States was sponsoring in Syria did not have capable air defense systems able to reach the high altitude that Russian bombers were operating at. They had these man-portable systems that were good at downing helicopters and anything flying too low, but Russian bombers at maximum altitude dropping precision-guided bombs, these terrorists had no means of countering that. And Ukraine is quickly finding themselves in a very similar situation, first along the line of contact, and then over time, further and further past the line of contact. The New York Times goes on and it says, Pentagon officials are worried that Moscow's barrage of attacks from afar is draining Ukraine's stores of the missiles it uses to defend itself. And we all saw that happen. We watched Russia launching these cruise missile attacks and these drone attacks using the Grom-2. And we watched Ukraine struggling to shoot them all down once or twice a month, these massive barrages. And then it came to a point where they, at that time, were admitting Ukraine was running out of its own Soviet-era air defense systems and needed Western systems. But the West doesn't have systems in terms of quantity or quality able to provide the protection Ukraine needs. So they've been sending these systems and they're unable to pick up the slack. And they won't be able to because not enough of these launchers exist and not enough of the missiles for the launchers exist. And they won't anytime soon. The article goes on and it says stocks of missiles for Soviet-era S-300 and Buk air defense systems, which make up 89% of Ukraine's protection against most fighter aircraft and some bombers, were projected to be fully depleted by May 3rd and mid-April, according to one of the leaked documents. The document, which was issued on February 28th, based the assessment on consumption rates at that time. It's not clear if those rates have changed. The same document assessed that Ukrainian air defenses designed to protect troops on the front line, where much of Russia's air power is concentrated, will be completely reduced by May 23rd, resulting in strains on the air defense network deeper into Ukrainian territory. And we don't know how accurate this information is, but obviously Russia itself assessed that along the line of contact, Ukrainian air defenses were diminished, and they had the ability to begin using these glide bombs. The article goes on and it says, Moscow could decide it's finally safe for its prized fighter jets and bombers to enter the fray and directly threaten the outcome of the war on the ground. Senior Pentagon officials say that such a move would be a major challenge for Ukraine, particularly if Russian fighter jets and bombers are given freer rein to attack Ukrainian troop positions and essential artillery targets on the ground. It also says that they are like a Jenga tower. Once you take out one piece, the rest are vulnerable. If Ukraine's air defenses collapse or significantly reduce, their ground forces, in particular their artillery, would be under immediate threat. And without artillery, the backbone of the war effort, Russian forces will have an opportunity to make significant gains on the battlefield. And this could potentially be one of the reasons the US is urging Ukraine to rush its offensive, ready or not. When your air defenses are completely depleted, the entire war is going to change. Everything about it is going to change, and none of it will be in Ukraine's favor. This is your last chance. It's better to give it a try now before everything changes in Russia's favor drastically and obvious for everyone in the world to know, no matter how the Western media tries to spin it. This is, for Ukraine, an unsolvable problem. There is no way for the West, again, there's no way for the West to provide the air defense systems in terms of the launchers and their capabilities, or the number of missiles necessary to keep up with these barrages, these cruise missiles and drones, and then also provide force protection along the entire line of contact, which is, again, it's like 1,000 kilometers long. Longer if you count the border between the rest of Russia and Ukraine and also Belarus. It is an incredibly long line of contact to protect, and the West clearly does not have the ability to provide the means of protection for Ukraine as their Soviet air systems deplete. Then it says they made the choice that they were not going to sacrifice their knights for their pawns, and this is in regards to Russia not sacrificing its warplanes, its military aviation, knowing that Ukrainian air defense systems were still active and capable. They were waiting, and now it says instead they're going to throw those mobilized troops without proper air support because they are a more plentiful resource. But that's not true. We've seen how Russia has fought in this conflict. We've seen the very slow, methodical process that Russia has been using, leveraging its long-range firepower, its artillery, its rockets, its missiles. That's what they were using to soften up Ukrainian defenses, and only once those defenses were softened sufficiently would they send armor and infantry forward to attack them. They understood the problem, and they adjusted their tactics accordingly. They did nothing without proper air support. The way they were waging this fight did not require them to have air support, although once they have the ability to introduce air support, their tactics will change entirely again. The New York Times is not telling us anything new. These leaks are not really telling us anything new. This is something that I've been talking about for months. This is something that we could all see coming for months. Russia surely saw this for months, and their cruise missile campaigns, their drone campaigns, forcing Ukraine to expend its air defense, the interceptors across their air defense network. That was all designed to hasten this day that we're at now, where Ukraine is at the edge of running out of air defense resources. Then the New York Times says, this is kind of how they finish up the article, but Ukraine will need more, far more than the Patriot in the coming months, military officials say, and Pentagon procurement officials have been scouring Allied stockpiles. And again, Alex and Alexander of the Duran, they both have been talking about Ukrainian and NATO officials looking everywhere for especially additional Soviet-era air defense systems like the S-300. Several American officials said that despite fears that the Russian Air Force could pounce Such a move could be very risky for Mr. Putin. Just because he brings it back in play doesn't mean it's going to have smashing success, General Breedlove said. But when you really think about it, that Russia brought everything up to this point in the first place is already a success. The fact that they have ground down this huge, formidable air defense network, ground it down to the point where it's about to collapse, and they're about to get the opportunity to use their military aviation more widely, that in and of itself is a smashing success. And here's one more article just from today via Reuters. South Korea to lend 500,000 rounds of artillery shells to U.S. report. And again, this is another outcome from these leaked documents. It says South Korea has reached an agreement to lend the United States 500,000 rounds of 155mm artillery shells. That could give Washington greater flexibility to supply Ukraine with ammunition, a South Korean newspaper reported on Wednesday. Now, this lending versus just selling it, these are just word games that South Korea is trying to use to get around their own legal obligations, prohibiting them from supplying weapons to an active conflict like what's going on in Ukraine. Their law prohibits it. The U.S. has put pressure on them and told them to do it anyway because they're occupied by U.S. military forces, just like Japan is. What choice do they really have? So they've gone ahead and done that. They violated their own national laws to do so. But when you really think about it, 500,000 rounds, that's 500,000 rounds. That sounds like a lot. But if you consider that Ukraine has been firing around 6,000 rounds per day, that's not even 3 months. It's not even 90 days worth of ammunition for Ukraine at 6,000 rounds a day. And that rate of fire is already many times smaller than Russia's rate of fire every single day. It's already an inadequate amount, and 500,000 is only going to be able to maintain that rate of fire for, say, another 3 months. Now, I have pointed this out. Alexander Micuris has pointed this out. You have 500,000 rounds. Instead of stretching it out across the next year or so, concentrate as much of it as possible into Ukrainian stockpiles ahead of the offensive, so that they have a huge amount of artillery ammunition surged in there and at their disposal for the offensive. However, that is something you could only do one time. Once that's depleted, then you're back to waiting for whatever your rate of production can provide, which is not nearly enough to even match 6,000 rounds per day, not even close. When you use these artillery pieces, because Ukraine has a small and shrinking number of artillery pieces compatible with these 155mm artillery rounds, these NATO artillery pieces, you get more ammunition for them, you're firing them more frequently, they're going to wear out and break down much faster. And when they break down, you have to send them 1,000 kilometers to the border between Ukraine and Poland, get the barrel replaced, get it refitted, and get it sent all the way back 1,000 kilometers to the front line. And you're doing this in the middle of an intense offensive, far from optimal. And this has been the problem that Ukraine has had this whole time, which is why they're in the situation they're in the first place. So we're going to continue hearing comments like this from General Breedlove, from Washington, from London, from Brussels, about how despite this situation and the advantages Russia seems to be gaining, it doesn't guarantee success for Russia. But I would say reaching this juncture in the first place is already a success on Russia's part. This is a war of attrition, and Russia has brought this entire conflict to a point where the West is unable to continue sustainably supplying Ukraine. That seems like a success to me. And we could all see where this is all going. And we can remember this same kind of rhetoric from governments and from the Western media regarding the final years of the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, how they were going to stick it out for as long as it took. Clearly, they couldn't, and they didn't. We saw the same in regards to the U.S. proxy war in Syria. All of the ideas that they came up with to try to save these terrorists that they were sponsoring at the end, they were unable to. And I want to point out that the U.S. went as far as invading and occupying eastern Syria in a failed attempt to back the terrorists and get them all the way to Damascus, and it didn't work. And so now here we are with Ukraine. We see a very similar situation taking shape, and the question is, how far will the US go to try to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat? How will Russia and its allies avoid escalating this to someplace dangerous, like a direct confrontation with the US and the rest of NATO? Where will it go from here? The US is desperate. How desperate will they become? That's the real danger that we face here with this conflict. We'll continue keeping an eye on it. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to my channel. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. You can also find all of the links to everything that I've referenced in this video in the video description below, as well as ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. I will never monetize my YouTube channel. If a commercial pops up, feel free to skip it because it's not helping me out at all. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's one-time donations, month to month, if you're sharing my work with others, or you're showing support on Twitter when the Ukrainian government is trying to single me out and try to intimidate me into being silent. I appreciate all of that support. That is what makes this possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.